Good afternoon to all the participants. My name is Yash Dhingra, and I am a scientist B working in the Indian Computer Emergency Response Team, which is a part of the Ministry of Electronics and IT of Government of India. And I've been working here since the last 3.5 years almost. I work in the incident response team, and we look at cyber security incidents, and uh, we handle cybersecurity incidents of various stakeholders, and we also do a lot of other activities, some of which we are going to look at in this presentation. So let us begin. First thing is, I think since my presentation was actually scheduled earlier, but I think you've had quite a few presentations already. So we'll just skip through the basic things pretty quickly. And I think you all know what cybersecurity is. So just look at the definition. We'll move on pretty quickly. So cybersecurity or computer security is the protection of computer systems from theft or damage to their hardware, software, or electronic data. So any kind of damage that somebody can cause to your computer system is basically is like a threat, and all the protection of these systems, all these topics, these they come under the umbrella of cybersecurity. So why it is important, especially nowadays, the main thing is that all the normal devices, normal things that used to be there around us are getting connected to the internet. You might have heard of Internet of Things, the term IoT. So 10 or 15 years back, your phone was just a phone. It was there to it could only call up. If you wanted to call someone, you could place a call. If you wanted to message someone, you could send an SMS. But otherwise, it was not connected to the internet, and it was not smart as such. So now all your phones are smart devices, which means they can connect to the internet and they can take a lot of actions automatically on their own. So they have become smart devices. Similarly, you might have heard about air conditioners, fans, refrigerators, and even cars nowadays are becoming smart devices. They get connected to the internet and they can listen to commands, and they can actually be operated remotely. So sitting inside your house, you can actually start your car and start the air conditioner. So all these systems and devices which were not typically internet devices are getting connected to the internet. And with the number of devices increasing online, we need to focus more and more on cybersecurity, and we need to focus more and more on our own cybersecurity as such. So that is one point. Then we are more and more reliant on these smart devices and on these computer devices for our daily lives. So for very typical simple tasks which were like done manually earlier, we are now dependent on some kind of computer system somewhere. So we need to take care that these computer systems are not hacked and they are not misused by an attacker. So that is one more point. And then the last point, which is I think the most important, is that your money is online. So any kind of transaction that you do with your debit card, with your credit card, or your Paytms or any other wallets, everything is, all the money is actually flowing online. So even if you're depositing a check in your bank, in the back end, the bank is actually transacting with some other bank via online transactions. So somewhere your money is actually flowing through the internet. That is what is happening. So we need to look at these things even more carefully, and we need to make sure that we protect ourselves very well. Then there are three goals of cybersecurity, which is called the CIA of cybersecurity in the colloquial way. That is what we say. So the first thing is the confidentiality. So if you're having any communication online, you want it to be confidential, which means if you're sending a message or an email or a WhatsApp text to somebody, you want that only the intended person should get that message, and nobody should be able to read it while it is traveling through the internet. So that is protecting the confidentiality. And then the next is integrity. So you want that if you've stored any information online, if you've saved any files, or if you've saved any communication on your online resources, then you want that it should stay in the same form as it was saved initially. Nobody should be able to modify that. So all your data should stay in the original form itself unless you are yourself modifying it. So if you're storing some file on your maybe your Dropbox or your Google Drive or your Microsoft OneDrive, you're saving a file, you want that it should stay in the same form. It should not be modified by somebody. Or your email communications, they should be in the same form as they have. And even your bank account, your balance should not be able to be modified by an attacker. So that is maintaining the integrity of the data. And then the third point is ensuring the availability. So if you want to make a transaction through your bank account, you want to make sure that it is always available. So if you want to, if there is an urgent need and you want to transfer some money to someone, your bank account and your net banking website should actually be available. It should not go offline at the right time so that you're not able to transfer. So that is ensuring the availability. So you might have through these courses or through or otherwise you might have heard of DOS attacks, which is called denial of service attacks. So these denial of service attacks are basically taking the availability of the resource down. So that is what these attacks are intended for, and we need to make sure that we can prevent such attacks from happening. So these are the three goals of cybersecurity. Then I'll talk about certain current trends that have been going on in cybersecurity. So this will be interesting for you in the sense that you might have heard of these cybersecurity incidents in the newspaper or on the TV or through some other media. So you might be able to relate to them. So a large number of attacks on banking infrastructure have been happening over the years. And I've listed 2 or 3 attacks from 2016 and 18. One of them is a Bangladesh central bank, which is, I think, their the biggest bank of Bangladesh. So that was attacked in 2016. And 2 of India's cooperative banks, which are basically small-sized banks, were attacked in, I think, 2018. One of them is Cosmos Bank and the other is City Union Bank. So just a little bit of detail about Cosmos Bank and what happened over there. So Cosmos Bank is a cooperative bank which is based in Pune, and the attackers were actually able to clone a lot of debit cards of this particular bank. So what they did was using some techniques, either by using a skimming device. So I don't know if you've heard this, but when you punch your debit card inside an ATM machine, it is possible that an attacker might have installed a skimmer device on that ATM machine, and the skimmer device will be able to read the details from the magnetic strip of your debit card, and it will be able to make a copy of it. So these attackers were able to clone a lot of debit cards of this particular bank, and these cloned debit cards were actually swiped at the same time on the same day in 28 different countries on different ATM machines, obviously. So and cash was withdrawn. So that was one attack which they executed, and the other attack was an attack on the Swift gateway of the bank. So Swift gateway is basically a system or a computer system where the transactions are actually authorized. So all the banks, they actually talk to other stakeholders like Visa, MasterCard, and other stakeholders. So there are lots of such devices on the bank's network which are used for authorizing the transactions that you make. And one of them is called a Swift gateway. So the attackers were able to compromise the Swift gateway of this particular bank, and they were able to fraudulently authorize all of the transactions which they were making. So through this particular attack, they were able to transfer a lot of money to a Hong Kong based bank. Then you must have heard of this Arogya Setu application. I'm sure some of you are actually using it as well. So this was launched by the government for contact tracing, and a lot of such fake Arogya Setu applications came up as soon as the government had officially launched this. So within a week, or I think 10 days probably, we had started getting reports of fake Arogya Setu applications which were being spread through WhatsApp messages. And mostly these were targeted on our security forces and government officials. So these were actually all these fake applications were basically basically spying application. And when the user would download the APK file and then install it on their device, it would start recording their microphone, their camera, and it would start taking their contacts, SMSs, and a lot of other things, basically to spy on the victim and to get a lot of information about them. So TikTok was one of the applications which was recently blocked by the government. And you might have heard about this incident where these a lot of around 200 or 220 applications was banned by the government for various different reasons. And one of them was TikTok, which has actually been flagged by a lot of other countries as well. So this is a report from August last year, and it was found out that TikTok was actually collecting the MAC addresses of the users, and it was using these MAC addresses for user profiling and for basically to sell all this data to advertising companies who would be able to serve the victim with targeted ads to generate more revenue. So this MAC address collection is actually not a legal thing, and it is prohibited by Google also. So this that's why TikTok was actually flagged for this particular thing, and it was also blocked by a lot of countries, including India. Then defacement, I think you already would have seen some of these examples where some government website, the homepage of the website is actually defaced, and the attacker puts their own web page on the website just to show off that they have been able to compromise a government website. And this is a pretty common attack, especially around the important days. For example, 26th January is coming up. So that is a time when a lot of government websites are actually defaced. And even on around 15th August, so any of the national holidays, these things tend to happen a lot. And the attacker is able to figure out some kind of vulnerability in the website, and then they are able to exploit that particular vulnerability to basically deface the website. Email, you will get an email inside your mail account, and the attacker will say that they have compromised your email account, and they will ask for some money in terms of bitcoins. So this is one of I think pretty old attack, but I think we're still seeing this pretty commonly nowadays also. So the attacker uses some anonymous emailer website and simply sends you an email saying that they have attacked you, but that is not the case. Then cryptojacking. Cryptojacking is made up of two words, crypto and then hijacking. So if you've heard of cryptocurrencies, then this particular attack is a pretty simple attack wherein the attacker actually finds out a particular website which is visited by a large number of users, and the attacker identifies some vulnerability in the website, and by exploiting that particular vulnerability, they are able to place a 3 or 4 line code inside the code of the website. And by placing that particular code, what happens is that whenever any user visits this particular website, they start mining cryptocurrency for the attacker. So if there are 1,000 people who are visiting this particular website, or maybe there are 1,000,000 visitors of this particular website, so that entire 1 million people will be mining cryptocurrency, and their CPU usage will go up, and their CPU usage resources will be utilized for mining cryptocurrency. So this particular attack, I think, is not common nowadays. I think it subsided somewhere before COVID, late 2019 or maybe early 20. Ransomware is a still popular attack, and it is still commonly happening. So you might have heard about a lot of different kinds of ransomware, and some of them are called Dharma ransomware, Crisis ransomware. So there are a lot of ransomware from these two families which are still going on, and the attacker will be able to push a malicious file onto your machine, and when that file is executed, your entire data on your device will be encrypted and you will not be able to use it. So the attacker will demand some ransom money in terms of bitcoins, and when you pay that, they will say that when you pay them the money, they will give you a decryptor tool, but you can never be sure whether that will happen. So through these current trend and cybersecurity case studies, we were talking about this particular word called vulnerability. So let's just briefly it is. So basically, a vulnerability is a hole inside a fence. So you don't somebody from the other side of the fence to be able to cross over. You build a fence, and then if you unintentionally leave a hole inside that fence, that is basically a vulnerability in very simple terms. So this is the Wikipedia definition of vulnerability is a weakness which can be exploited by an attacker to perform unauthorized actions within a computer system. So very simply, very simple explanations. And then we'll look at different types of vulnerabilities. So there are three kinds of vulnerabilities: technology weaknesses, configuration weaknesses, security policy weaknesses. So technology weaknesses, these are basically unintentional weaknesses which have been left behind in the code of the software by the developer himself or herself. So if the company who is building the software is unintentionally leaving or an error inside the code which is allowing the attacker to take advantage of it, then this is called technology weakness. And you might have seen that Windows keeps giving you a notification that you need to update the operating system. Similarly, you'll be getting such updates on Apple and Android as well. So these updates are basically meant to fix these technology weaknesses. Then second is configuration weakness. And configuration weakness is basically on the side of the user of the software or the hardware. So if you are using a tool, software tool or a hardware tool, and you're not configuring it properly, and because of this particular error on your part, this is leaving your system vulnerable to attack. That is called a configuration weakness. So for example, you are buying a new Wi-Fi router from the market, and then you are not changing the default password of that Wi-Fi router, then any attacker will be able to use that default password to log into your Wi-Fi router and to make changes. So this is a configuration weakness. Then there is a security policy weakness. So I think all of you would have come across this particular prompt whenever you try to make a new account on any website. It will tell you that you need to have a password which is at least 8 characters long, and then you need to have special characters, you need to have capital letters, you need to have small letters inside the password. So this is basically a security policy, and which is being enforced by the company. And if the organization is not enforcing proper security policies, then that becomes a security policy weakness. So these are the three different kind of vulnerabilities which are there. Then all the companies, all the software vendors, they regularly release their vulnerability notes and their patches. So whenever a vulnerability is identified and the company gets to know that their software has a new vulnerability, what they will do is they will rectify that particular vulnerability, and then they will issue a patch or an update. And then all this information is published on the vendor's website itself, and they advertise that you need to quickly update to the latest version of the software, just to make sure that you are not part of an attack which is taking advantage of a particular vulnerability. So all these vulnerabilities which are released into the public by the companies are tracked by Certin for the most common vendors like Cisco, Microsoft, Google, Apple, Adobe, various different vendors of software tools. So all these are tracked by Certin, and we regularly publish vulnerability notes on our site. Then some best practices about what we should do to make sure that our system is not part of an attack, and an attacker is not able to misuse any of these vulnerabilities in our system to basically cause some harm to our system. So these are the most important points. You need to keep your applications updated. You need to keep your operating system updated, and you need to make sure that you're not using any pirated software. And then you should always maintain a good antivirus on your machine. So very basic best practices. And then we look at how antiviruses work. This is just a very high, uh, very overview, kind of an overview of how antiviruses work. So antiviruses work on the basis of file hashes. So just like a fingerprint can be used to identify a person and to authorize a person to enter a particular secure area, in a similar way, an antivirus uses file hashes. So a file hash is like a fingerprint of a file, which is a small 256-bit or 512-bit identification of a particular file. And whenever a file is being executed on your machine, the antivirus basically compares the file hash of that particular file with the database that it has stored inside it, and it is able to identify whether a particular file is malicious or not. So that is basically how an antivirus works, and we should always have a good and updated antivirus on all our devices, just to make sure that the most common of these malware can at least be prevented from running on our machine. Then there are a lot of free antiviruses available, but they have the basic features. If you want more advanced features, you can actually pay for them. Moving on to the next section, which is social engineering. And I think most of you would have heard of this. There are different kinds of attacks which come under the social engineering bracket, called phishing, and then honey trapping is one of the social engineering attacks. Then even malicious attachments actually come under this if you're receiving them via email. So all these kinds of attacks come under social engineering, and we are going to look at these some case studies of this. So phishing is basically creating a fake website which looks exactly like the original website, and which is used for hacking the username and password of the victims. So nowadays, income tax phishing emails and messages are being received by a lot of people, because 31st December was the last date, I think, to file for income tax returns. And now people are actually expecting that they will be getting some kind of refund from the income tax department. So these income tax refund messages have been around. And this is an example of how such an email looks. So you will get an email that there is some refund which you need to claim. And in order to claim that refund, you need to click on a particular link to go to a particular website, which looks like this. So when you go to this particular website, it will ask you to select your bank. And when you select your bank, it will take you to a lookalike page of your net banking website. So if you have an account with State Bank of India, it will take you to the phishing page of State Bank of India, where it will ask you for your net banking credentials. And once you fill in those credentials, it will ask you for your Aadhaar card, your PAN card, your phone number, your address, your account number, your IFSC code, ATM pin, all these details it will take. And then basically it will send you a link to a mobile application as well, which will try to steal your OTP messages. So that is all this we will be discussing in our next session, which we have, I think, tomorrow. So moving on, this is an example of a phishing page of RBI. On the left side is the genuine website, and on the right side is the fraudulent website. This is a phishing page of Paytm. You can see that it is asking for the OTP. And then there are several websites which actually give you which give you APK files of Android applications. And when you search for the application of a particular bank on Google, you will be redirected to any of these APK websites, and you will be able to see a lot of such fraudulent pages and fraudulent APKs which will be available. So if you install any of these, then basically your device is compromised. So these are some examples of how phishing can be carried out. The first one is by using compromised web server. So notsosecure.com is a website which the attacker has compromised and then placed subfolders underneath. So for example, slash State Bank of India slash login. So if you don't pay attention, then this can be a problem. And then by using free web hosting websites, so there are a lot of free web hosting sites which offer you free website space and free domains as well. So there is one such website is called 000webhost.com. So the attacker can create a website which looks like www.statebankofindia.com dot 000webhost.com. So this is a way of causing confusion, and then by registering fake domain names with some spelling mistake, like in this case you are seeing bankname.com and then a C has been inserted. In a similar way, you can actually change one of the characters also. That is also an attack. You can, for example, in State Bank of India, if you change one of the I's to one, some of the users may not notice that and they might be tricked into actually visiting the website. So all these attacks are pretty common. And then there are URL shortening services. So like Bitly and Tiny URL, you can actually hide your actual URL behind these tiny URLs. So that is another kind of attack. Some best practices related to phishing: always check the source of the email that you have received, and you should not click on any links inside emails. Always hover over the link and then just try to see what the actual link is. Then by right clicking, you can actually copy the link address and paste it in your browser if you want to visit it. That is always a better thing to do. And if you're still not sure, then it's just good to search for a particular website on Google or on Bing or any other search engine, and then visit that particular website. So moving to malicious attachment. So this is one of the most common kind of attacks that is carried out, and in the biggest cybersecurity breaches that have happened, this is one of the most common entry vectors into the organization. And you will receive an email which will have some sense of urgency to it. So this is a sample of such an email. You'll see that it is saying, please find attached an urgent message from Joint Secretary on the above subject. So there will be an attachment which could be a doc file, which could be a PDF file, which could be an executable, which could be a zip file. And if you're receiving any such file and the mail has a sense of urgency to it, you can actually be sure that it is a phishing, it is a malicious attachment and you are actually being attacked. So this is actually a case study. And whenever you're receiving such an email, it is good to verify the source of that email. Unless you're expecting a particular attachment from the source, then until then you should not click on that particular file, because it can actually compromise your machine. So then honey trapping is another kind of social engineering attack, wherein on your social media accounts you will receive a friend request and by some random person whom you do not know, and then once you accept their friend request, you will they will start talking to you. After befriending you for some time, they will try to trick you into installing some other tool from a fraudulent website, and once you install that particular tool on your machine is actually compromised. So this particular attack has actually been seen in a lot of case studies, and one of them was actually in the newspapers, I think 1 or 2 weeks back, wherein one of the members of the security forces was actually attacked by using this. Then some basic best practices of how you can actually stay safe on the web. So these are some common techniques which I have personally been practicing, and then I have compiled them into this presentation just to fit out to all the participants. So the most basic thing that you can actually do to find out what all information is available about you on the web is to simply to Google yourself, or basically put your name inside double quotes and then search for it. By doing this, you will actually be able to find out what all information you have shared online, which is publicly visible. and then you will be able to take it down if necessary. And then another tip is to actually check inside Google Images, because there you will be able to find out a lot of photos which you might have unintentionally shared publicly and you don't intend to do that. So you can find out a lot of information like this. And then you should go through your social media profiles. Just check if in any of your photos you have unintentionally revealed any of your personal information. For example, you might have unintentionally revealed your home address or your Aadhaar card number or your some other kind of some information through any of your photos or through any of your posts that you have put up online on Facebook or Instagram or any other social media. And just go through all these posts. If there is anything, any information which is available published publicly, you should take those posts down. So these any information about you which can be used to identify you is called PII, or personally identifiable information. And then you can just scan your friend list and check if there is any person in your friend list whom you have not met or who is an unknown person to you. So you should always just remove all these unknown people from your social media profiles, because you never know, sometime you might be careless and you might share some information which might be going out to unknown people who might actually be potential attackers. Then just go through the security settings, especially in your Facebook profile. If you have, there are a lot of such settings, and you should make sure that none of your posts are actually public. All your posts should only be visible to your friends and not anybody else outside that. And then your phone number, your email IDs, all these information should also be confidential and they should not be visible publicly on your profile. So some other things to keep in mind is that every bit of data is important. Even your phone number can actually cause a lot of trouble, because your Paytm or your MobiKwik or whatever wallets you might be using, they are all directly linked to your phone number. So they can actually be misused as well. And then you should avoid signing in onto untrusted system. So just make sure that whenever you're signing into your email accounts or any of your net banking accounts, you should only sign in on your own machine, and you should avoid signing in on somebody else's machines. Even if you have to sign in, then in that case you should always use incognito or private mode, which is nowadays available in all browsers. The main thing about this is that when you close that particular window, you are automatically signed out from your account. So the next thing is that you should disable autoplay for USB drives in Windows, and you should always scan your USB drives with a good antivirus, and you should use multiple online identities for different purposes. So if you have email accounts, then your official email account and your personal email account should be separate. And if you're using your email account to sign in to a lot of websites, for example, Make My Trip, Zomato, or Book My Show, or any other such website, or Amazon, Flipkart, anything, then you should have a separate email account which you're using only for signing in. And that particular email account should not have any personal communication about you or any of your contacts. So this is just a basic way of segregating your online identities. And then this is also an important thing. If you're signing in onto any, if you're putting your username and password onto any website, then make sure that it is actually an HTTPS website, which means a secure SSL layer is actually top of the HTTP protocol, which is used for transferring information and to, basically for web browsing. So it should be, or it should always be an HTTP website if you're signing in onto it. So if it is not an HTTPS website, normally you'll see that your browser will say that it is not secure. And if it is HTTPS, see that there will be a lock icon which will be visible on the address bar, and it will say that your connection is secure. Then there are several such sensational news items and links which you might come across online, which might give you some sensational news, and then it might trick you actually into clicking on the link so that your device can be compromised. So you should always avoid clicking on such links, and you should avoid filling up such forms like this, which is visible on the screen now. Then some best practices regarding staying safe on the web. You should always use unique and random passwords. I think you know that, because that is normally that is, I think, the most common thing that is told to people. And then you should include uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and characters inside your password to make it difficult to guess. And then, if you are finding it difficult to manage all your passwords, you can actually use some password managers like LastPass, OnePass, or something like that, which actually require you to remember only one master password, and then they will supply the actual password of whatever website you're visiting. And then you should keep changing your passwords frequently. And the last point is that you should implement two-factor authentication wherever it is available. So on Gmail and on other such email clients, two-factor authentication is available, and you can actually enable that. So two-factor means that you need to supply a password, and then an OTP will be sent onto your mobile device, or via some other factor you will be signed in. So it will need two separate sets of information for you to be signed in. So you should always enable that whenever it is available. And as I just said, you can actually enable that even in your email accounts, which is always a good practice. So that is the end of the presentation. And we don't have much times, but I'll see if we can take one or two questions, and then if you have any further questions, you can get in touch with Naresh ji, and then he can like forward me the questions.